right, welcome back to the Crimson Flag podcast, where we bring you a class-conscious analysis of historic and current events which are pertinent to the international working class movement. All right, my name is FBK, and it is going to just be me here today. We're going to talk about events regarding Gaza and larger occupied Palestine. So let's just jump right into it. So, a week into the conflict, Israeli airstrikes and artillery barrages have already killed around 200 Palestinians, with 92 being reported as women and children. With only 10 deaths being reported from the Israeli side, the country's apologists made their well-worn out claim of civilians as a human shield and their equally stale, "What would you do if somebody was hurling rockets at your country?" As many of you already know, this came as Israel began evicting Palestinians in East Jerusalem to make way for Israeli settlers. Tensions began to boil over as Israeli police raided Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, and civilian clashes in Israel erupted. Hamas has responded with rocket fire, and the two sides have been exchanging blows over the past week. The videos coming from Gaza have been gut-wrenching, and the shitty arguments that people make in defense of Israel is just as hard to stomach at times. So we want to make it clear that those involved with this show unwaveringly stand with our friends and comrades in occupied Palestine. But in today's episode, we'll focus for a moment on the international reaction to this conflict. A week deep into the conflict, President Biden has only been able to muster up a statement on hoping that the conflict would be closing down sooner than later. Beyond this, his public statements have largely been centered around Israel's right to defend itself from terrorism, as he says. The closest he got to a defense of the Palestinians was when, in a phone call between him and Netanyahu, he expressed the belief that Palestinians deserve greater security, freedom, and economic opportunities. After facing scrutiny for these lackluster comments, Biden yesterday resorted to releasing a video where he addressed all those celebrating Eid. In this, he simply reiterates his belief that Palestinians and Israelis deserve equal rights. The unwillingness on the Biden administration's part to even call for a ceasefire has left 28 senators to have to do so on their own. The Biden administration has also put their stamp of approval on $735 million worth of precision-guided weapons to Israel. But their support goes further, as the U.S. made it a point to hold up the UN Security Council's call for a ceasefire. A week from today, when this conflict first began, the People's Republic of China, Norway, and Tunisia began urging the UN Security Council to release a statement on the need for a ceasefire. Diplomats from the UN claimed that the first two closed meetings were effectively blocked by the United States, as they cited that a statement of this sort may result in an escalation of hostilities. It's been reported that the May 12th meeting resulted in 14 out of 15 members voting for the statement. The only obstructing vote came from the U.S. These moves have led China's foreign ministry spokeswoman, Hua Chunying, to publicly call out the U.S. on the 14th of May. She said, quote, "What we feel is that the U.S. keeps saying that it cares about the human rights of Muslims, but it was ignoring the suffering of the Palestinian people," unquote. China went on to head an emergency meeting for the UN Security Council yesterday, May 16th. Unfortunately, this third meeting also ended in a stalemate. China's foreign minister, Wang Yi, who headed the emergency meeting, stated, quote, "Regrettably, simply because of the obstruction of one country, the Security Council hasn't been able to speak with one voice," unquote. Israel has taken note that Iranian media has reacted overwhelmingly positive towards China's involvement in the situation. As longtime enemies of Iran, and feeling U.S. pressure over worries of Chinese involvement in Israeli development projects, Israel finds its relationship with China taking a turn towards tension. This time around, we can definitely see a pressure growing as many aren't being swayed by the hardline Israeli narrative. Although the establishment progressives are calling for a ceasefire, they haven't been able to bring themselves to support boycotting Israel and cutting military aid. The narrative is slowly changing, though, as we can see folks such as John Oliver even call out Israel, surprisingly. These may be cracks in the dam, as some have described it, but we'll have to see on that. So the major point that I want to stress here today is that there is three ways that the United States is basically obstructing at least the UN from, I mean, we can criticize the UN all day, but to go out of your way to actually obstruct it from putting out a statement on a ceasefire is really telling of how dedicated the United States is to its relationship with Israel. So it's obstructing a ceasefire in that way. It is also still the Biden administration is still sending precision guided rockets to Israel right now. And at this point, he's given comments, but for the most part, he's been almost silent on most of this. He'll talk about Israel needing to defend itself from terrorists in these little comments, but he's largely been relying on phone calls between him and Benjamin Netanyahu. And, we'll have to see how this situation develops. We want to put in a quick opinion about this now because this is one of those fast developing kind of situations. So we know we'll probably be reporting about it very differently in the next week. But this is where we're at right now as far as the international community's response to it. And just another point, one thing that I want to do today is throw out a prediction. And in this kind of stuff, it is risky to do that. But, I just want to put this out there. A lot of us know that Benjamin Netanyahu who is the prime minister of Israel, he's been involved in quite a few controversies in the state of Israel. He's faced protests from his own community over the past couple of months. And these are largely due to corruption charges. Now, one thing that I have noticed from outlets such as CNN and maybe even MSNBC, they have floated the idea that Benjamin Netanyahu could be engaging in these attacks because he's opportunistically trying to justify his need to be prime minister still for Israel. One way that the Biden administration could try and make everybody happy, I'm not saying they should do this, but they're in a very awkward position and they're very quiet right now. And I think they're scrambling about what to do. Some people have described it as like the political ground is shifting a little bit beneath them. One way that I think they may try and get out of this is they could place all the blame on Benjamin Netanyahu. It would be very easy for them to do. They could say, look, we're not against the state of Israel. It's just this guy, Netanyahu, he had corruption charges and then he was engaging in this war, to keep himself as prime minister. I mean, we'll see if that happens because I don't want to fool anybody. Right now, I mean, Biden, the comments he's making, he's saying that he doesn't feel like this is an overreaction on the part of Israel, which is just outright apology for them. So yeah, I'm just floating that prediction at the end of it here, but other than that, I just want to mention that support for Palestine has been coming in not just from certain countries in the international community, but from the people of different countries themselves. We've seen quite a few protests in London, in New York, in Los Angeles. Even here in Memphis, Tennessee, we saw a protest yesterday where about 300 people came out and marched through our downtown. I'll play a couple little videos from that here for anybody watching on YouTube while we finish this up. But I encourage anybody who is able to go out and engage in whatever you can in your city, um, especially being here in the Imperial Core. If you are here in the United States, it's just that much more important to get out there and simply call for the United States to, at the very least, to just stop sending military aid to Israel. So tomorrow there has been a call for a general strike. So that will be Tuesday, May 18th. And this is a call to action for anybody who is in support of Palestine. So if there's anything in your area, be sure to go to that if you can. If there's not anything in your area, maybe just find a couple of buddies and grab a couple of signs or flags and stand at a very popular street corner. I've seen people do that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with getting it started that way. So with that, we're going to end it here. We'll definitely keep following the situation. This was just a quick little update. The last thing I do want to mention is that we do have a Twitter account now. So look up Crimson_pod if you want to find us on Twitter. All right. So thanks everybody for listening. Stay strong, keep up your resilience, and we will be in touch.